In 1944, Brest wasn't just a French coastal city. It was a deep-water Atlantic port that the Allies saw as a supply lifeline for every convoy, fuel, drum, and ammo crate. This place was a gateway on for the Germans, a symbol, a fortress meant to prove the Reich was still in command. So fighting here wasn't just about winning ground, it was about winning the narrative. The Americans needed to open the port. The defenders needed to hold it long enough to buy time. Coastal guns and narrow approaches made every advance slow and bloody. When a place is called a fortress, arrogance stops being just ego-wit, becomes strategy. German fortress mindset plus arrogance. The defenders at Brest believed they had two things that could break any assault: concrete and discipline. Bunkers, tunnels, coastal batteries, everything was built not like a city, but like a machine whose only function was to hold. The orders were simple: no retreat, no negotiation, and even thinking about surrender was treason. That confidence blinded them, said them. American infantry were just numbers, exhaustible. But in modern war, concrete is only a fortress as long as the attacker can't properly coordinate fire. That misreading would become their most expensive mistake. The Americans weren't going to rely on brute force. They were going to use systems and math. Americans' method? Observers? Grids. Coordination. The Americans treated Brest not as a stage for a heroic rush, but as a problem to be solved. Forward observers, from rooftops and behind hedgerows, measured lines of sight, marked points on map grids, and spoke calm strings of numbers over the radio. Gun crews at the batteries were already setting, firing data, range, elevation, fuse, settings, everything slowly getting registered. Sometimes a couple of ranging shots, then a short pause, then corrections. It was like someone had started measuring the city with a ruler. The infantry also understood that every street had a price, so they were learning to carry the fire with them, not charge blindly. To the defenders, it all felt slow. They had no idea this was just a warm-up. Then the first real rounds came in, and the tempo of the battlefield changed instantly. First impacts. Warning, that doesn't feel like a warning. At first, this shelling felt like a warning, but a warning that sank into people's chests. The early rounds fell far off. Then the next salvos crept closer, and the defenders realized this wasn't random. Whenever a squad tried to leave a trench, whenever a messenger crossed open ground, rounds began to bracket them. German confidence was still on their lips, but their body language changed. Faster head counts, rushed reports, fountains of dust along supposedly safe routes. With every correction, American fire grew more precise, as if an invisible compass was spinning over the city. In Brest, movement itself became a risk. And when defenders don't adapt, artillery starts correcting them. Arcelation. Beat 1. Routes close. Safe spots shrink as the Americans adjusted their fire. The defenders' map of Brest shrank. The alleyway that had been covered yesterday was observed today. The courtyard they had assumed was dead ground was now a place where shells spoke very clearly. Supply runs shifted to nighttime. But even night didn't stay friendly for long, because every movement pattern becomes data, and data is an invitation for artillery. Communication lines came under pressure too. Sending a message from one position to another became a gamble, and a gamble means delay. The Germans kept trusting their rigid defense. The Americans found new angles every hour. Every correction was the death of another option. The fight stopped being just about firepower, it became a battle of time and nerves. Escalation. Beat 2. Morale cracks plus command pressures. Lowly, Brest turned less into a city and more into a Mazai smoke rubble, and shattered buildings with uncertainty at every turn. The worst thing for the defenders was that their illusion of control was disappearing. Orders were issued, but didn't arrive. When they did, the moment had already passed. Commanders who had given confident briefings the day before now showed fatigue and frustration, because every hold here meant more dead ground, more bracketed streets. Among the soldiers, whispers started spreading. Which position had been abandoned, where promised support never came? The idea of a fortress was no longer held together by concrete, but by moorland that was cracking. The moment was coming when the fortress myth would break. And then came the barrage that wasn't support, it was a decision. Climax. Payoff. When American artillery ends the argument, then the moment arrived when the fire stopped being background noise. It became command. The batteries fired in coordination, and the rhythm of shells over Brest felt like someone had measured the city's breathing. The first impacts shook the ground. The second wave found the places defenders still believed were safe. Dust and fragments of concrete filled the air. Phones slipped from hands, and even inside bunkers, there was no such thing as silence. This is where the tone of arrogance finally broke. Officers who had been barking orders now spoke in only two modes: reporting and damage control. Runners dashed from cover to cover, but every sprint was a gamble. Positions that, minutes earlier, had seemed unbreakable were now nothing more than hold as long as you can. With each salvo, their timetable dissolved a little more. And so did their confidence. This barrage captured Brest before the infantry fully did it. Convinced Brest, when the smoke cleared, the real story wasn't just victory. It was the aftermath. Aftermath. What it costs plus what collapsed when the firing stopped. Brest's fortress status still existed on paper, but on the ground it had collapsed. Defensive pockets were now isolated. Positions that had once covered each other were cut off by rubble and craters. With every new American push, defenders either had to fall back or fight in small, disconnected groups, and when that happens, the very idea of centralized command dissolves. Inside the city, civilians couldn't escape the pressure either. Homes destroyed, roads blocked, and uncertainty everywhere. At this stage, hold at all costs stopped being a slogan and turned into a literal sentence, because the costs were now painfully countable. Brest showed that in a modern siege. The myth of the fortress only survives as long as the attacker's fire and coordination failed to break through. But the lesson of Brest wasn't just about one port, meaning plus, legacy plus comment. Question at the center of Brest's story isn't artillery, it's mindset. The German defenders trusted concrete and reputation. The Americans trusted observation, coordination, and a repeatable process. The lesson here is that when arrogance turns into doctrine, it stops seeing reality. And artillery is a very violent way of reintroducing reality. Leadership under pressure isn't just about saying hold it, it's about adapting, changing routes, and accepting new facts as they arrive. In your view, in a siege, what breaks first? Supplies, leadership, or morale? So the real question becomes, during a siege, what's the first thing that fails?